Hi everyone. So today we're going to be trying to answer the question, how do you choose between 10% damage reduction and 10% armor? So as you're leveling up your character, you oftentimes will have to choose between these. So how do we do that? So in order to do that, we first need to understand a bit about how armor gets calculated for one, and then we'll need to also learn a little about how armor scales. And let me just kind of give you a little forewarning is that I don't know who designed armor at Blizzard, but it is a doozy. It's definitely different than anything that I've seen in other games, so uh, be ready for that. All right, so first off, how does percent armor get calculated in the game? So the way the percent armor gets calculated, it's actually relatively simple. So it is the following. So the total armor is equal to the base armor, which I'll explain what that is in a second, plus how much the base armor is increased by. So we take the percent armor total that we're increasing, and then we multiply that by the base armor to figure out the change in base armor. Okay. So first off though, what is base armor? Okay. The base armor, where does that come from? So this would be your gear, so like your breastplate or your chest piece, and it has a certain amount of armor on it. So your gear armor plus you could have, for example, gems, specifically skulls, which I would recommend using on your rings and amulet. And then you could also get armor from, say, your Paragon nodes. So Paragon nodes have a lot of those like plus 50 armor, plus 100 armor nodes in them. And then also one that a lot of people oftentimes forget about is strength. So strength, remember, gives you 1 armor per point in strength. Okay. So when we add up all these, then that gives us our base armor. And then we add that to the percent armor total times the base armor. Let's do an example for my character. So my base armor, when I add these all together, is 6,344. And then I add that to my percent armor total, which if I add up my amulet and breastplate and all that, I get 40.4%. And then I multiply that by my base armor, 6,344. So this would give us 6,344 plus this times this, which is 2,563. And then when we add those together, we get 8,907. And if I check my character sheet, we can see that that's what we get there. So why is this important? Well, this is important because it's important to understand that if you are adding a certain percent armor on your gear, that percent armor is only going to affect the base armor directly. So it's only going to be multiplied by the base armor, not your current total armor. So if I get 10% more, I'm not going to get 890 armor. What I'm actually going to get is 10% of the base armor, which would be 10% of 6,344, which would be equal to 634.4 armor. Okay. So this is just good to keep in mind. And this is also the same thing with like disobedience. So disobedience gives you another 75% potential armor, and that 75% gets applied to the base armor, not your current total armor. Along with understanding how armor gets calculated, we need to understand how does armor scale up and what does it do. So if we look at the tooltip here, it tells us a little bit about what it does. So it tells us it reduces physical damage taken from enemies of equal level by 81%. So there's a couple caveats here. So first off, this 81% number, this basically just acts as another damage reduction stat. So this gets calculated into your damage reduction formula the same way any other damage reduction gets calculated in. It's just one big stat. But secondly, though, and this is where things get a little let's say unfortunate, because it says this is for enemies of equal level. So this 81% is only true if you're going against characters of your same level. So for me, it's level 100. And what that means then is if I go against enemies that are higher than level 100, then I'm actually going to get less than 81%. Okay? And um, this is why we end up needing to use disobedience, because disobedience allows us to get way higher amounts of armor that allow us to scale up and fight higher enemies. Okay? Now, to understand how armor scales up, what we need to do is look at some more data points. So, for example, right now I'm getting 81%, but if I say take off my helmet and I have 6,976 armor, well, now we can see it, well, it dropped a lot, right, to 55%. And then my breastplate, if I take that off, well, now I'm only getting 30% with nearly 5,000 armor. And then with my gloves off, 25%, and so on. Okay, so what I did is I took a bunch of different combinations of gear, took off like amulets and things like that in order to get a bunch of data points. Okay, so let's look at those data points. I got a bunch of different data points for different armor values with different DR percentages. Okay, and what we could also do is graph this. So in order to try and understand sort of a trend and how this is scaling. So let's take a look at the graph right here. So here I've plotted my points here. So what I have is damage reduction on the vertical axis and armor on our horizontal axis. And what we can do is we can look for a trend, and we can see and ask yourself sort of how does the damage reduction scale with armor? And what we can see is that after maybe about here-ish, right, that it looks roughly linear, right? If I draw a line through here, it's roughly a straight line. Probably down here, it's kind of curving a bit, which is why we see that we need kind of a lot of armor to kind of get it started a bit. And then it's kind of roughly linear in increase. Okay. Now, that might make sense at first, right? And you might think, well, that seems logical, right? That as I say increase armor, that it would increase the DR kind of the same amount. Okay? But if you've been watching the series, a little red flag might be popping up, which is that as we increase in damage reduction additively, like we see here, that adding a certain amount of DR actually becomes more and more powerful in terms of keeping our character alive. Now, there's a way that we can see this a little bit more visually, which is by looking at what we talked about the other day, which is effective health. So instead of looking at armor versus percent DR, let's look at armor versus effective health. Now, all right, so now what I have here is a table of armor versus effective health. And what I did is I just chose my effective health to be 10,000 if I have 0 armor. So this would be my life that I'm starting with, right? So 10,000 life is how much my character would have. And then I figure out my effective health as I increase the armor. Now, how did I do this? So just as a reminder from the other day, our effective health is equal to our max life, which in this case would be 10,000. And then I divide that by 1 minus my damage reduction percentage. So for the 1700 armor, that was 3%. So that's 0.03 as a decimal. So if I divide that, I get 10,309, which is what goes here. So I did that for all of the values using Excel to do it for me quickly. Okay. And then we got our numbers here. And if you kind of just look at the numbers for a second, you might see something that seems kind of interesting in terms of how it's scaling. Okay. And if it's maybe not super obvious, what we could do is put this into a graph and it might become more obvious. So let's look at the graph right here. All right, so here we have a graph of effective health on our vertical axis versus armor on our horizontal axis. And now we can look at the trend and see how is the effective health changing as we increase the armor. So as the armor increases, what happens to effective health? Well, we can see that it increases as well, of course, but now it's increasing a little bit differently than the damage reduction percentage was, right? Where we can see that at the beginning, notice that as we increase the armor, is the effective health going up very much? Well, not really, right? It's not very steep, right? If I was to draw a line here, right, this would be not a very steep line. But then notice that as we increase armor here, the steepness of this line starts increasing faster and faster and faster and faster and faster. Okay? So this is kind of the interesting thing about armor. And this is why it's kind of so wild that they designed it this way. Because what this shows us is that at the beginning of our armor, so like maybe like up to like 6,000, right? Notice like it takes us like almost like 7,000 health just to double our effective health from 10,000 to 20,000, right? But then notice that it starts increasing faster and faster and faster, okay? To the point where notice that we get, what is this at the end here? We get about almost like 10,000 effective health for that last like 200 armor, not even 200 armor, 150 armor, right? So as we get to these larger armor values, we get kind of insane effective healths. Okay? Versus if our armor is lower, then we can add some armor and it really doesn't do a whole lot. Okay? So what does that mean then? Well, that means either, right, we have two choices when we're designing our character, right? Either I can say, you know what, forget armor completely because adding armor here, if I'm like down here and I add a little bit of armor, it's not going to really do much, right? Or I can go all out and go for these insane increases in effective health over here. Okay, so we really want to get near that max um, armor, which, by the way, the maximum amount of damage reduction that you can get, as it says here, is 85%. So on your stat sheet, it'll actually go up higher than that, but it's capped at 85%. So I can hear some of you guys kind of like screaming at me right now. But wait, this is only versus level 100 mobs, right? What about if I do something higher than level 100? Well, at this point, we have to do a little bit of extrapolation of data, a little bit of estimation and things like that, because unfortunately, we don't have the data in game to pull from because Blizzard doesn't ever show you the damage reduction versus higher mobs. So I had to do some math here, and basically what I did is I scaled up the armor from my previous table to this new table using one key data point, which is that I've been told that the max armor is 14,000 is max armor at T100. Okay, so at level 154 mobs, that's your max armor. So I scaled up my previous table to reach about 14,000 max armor, and I also scaled things in increments of 634, which is what is equal to 10% of my armor value. Remember from above, that's 634 armor. Okay. So, and then what I did is I found what's the change in effective HP per adding 643 armor. So as I go from this amount, 6,340 to 6,974, we get a change in effective HP of 5.68%. Okay. And how does that compare to 10% DR? So 10% DR If we look back at yesterday's video, right, remember that's 1 over zero point 0.9, which is 1.11, which gives us 11% increase. Okay. So here we would only get a 5.7% increase, which is less than 11% increase. Okay, but then as we get to these higher armor values, um, notice that our effective HP goes up faster and faster and faster still, and we can get a kind of a rough estimate as to how much effective HP we get at these higher armor values. And notice that maybe around here, it starts becoming more effective to add an additional 634 armor. Because if I add 634 armor from here to here, well then how much change in effective HP do I get? Well, I get 19%, which is more than 11%. Okay? And it just kind of keeps ramping up. So what's the takeaway here? So the main takeaway is that armor only really becomes useful once you get to these higher and higher armor values. So either you stack armor like crazy, in which case then you get a lot of value out of it, or you just say forget armor completely because adding a little bit of armor isn't going to help much down at these values compared to adding damage reduction. Now, what do most people do? Most people try and stack armor like crazy because armor is extremely powerful, 85% DR, um, if you stack it really high. So how do we get to these higher armor values? Well, you get percent armor on pretty much everything that you can. So that would be things like um, your legs, your breastplate, your helmet, your amulet, and then you also get disobedience, and you can put disobedience on your amulet to get 50% more value out of it. That's why it's 0.75% here. And if you get lots of paragon nodes and things like that, then you can get your armor up to that 14,000 level for pushing high nightmare dungeons. So I hope you guys found this video helpful. Thanks for sticking with it. You are awesome. Very proud of you. And I hope you guys have a great day. If you guys have other questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. And I'm planning on doing a comment video to answer your comments shortly here. So hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.